All right. So with innovation decidedly picking up in kidney disease, it would be great to get your thoughts on how the community is embracing this change. So, what's been the patient's response, the patient community's response to the innovation and clinical research that's ramping up over the past 5 years or so?
That's great. I mean, so if you go pre 5 years, the wins were small, and patients really frustrated. We say, hey, this is great, but it's years away. And now within the past 5 years, the frame time you outlined, it's dramatically different. And so we've had to launch new initiatives to reflect that. And so number one, we've now recognized that speed to care is a huge factor, right? Often patients go years before they get to a glomerular disease expert. There's only about 300 of them out of the 12,000 nephrologists. So that's been a priority of ours. So we've created the Nephrotic Syndrome Specialist Program to shorten that time. And those are also the folks that, as you know, they tend to be more research oriented and involved with clinical trials, which leads to the next priority, which is connecting patients to clinical trials. Because today you've been asking for alternatives to high dose steroids. We've been asking, our patients have been begging for alternatives to some of these toxic off-label therapies. So now, while we can't call these treatments, of course, they are care alternatives participating in a clinical trial. So that's been a focus of ours. And then I guess the third key point I would point out that we've pivoted is forming at a grassroots level. We've relaunched our regional communities throughout the United States. We've got 6 regions, one in Canada and 5 in the US, and they're composed of a series of 25 local communities. And their charge this year is really to go out, shake the trees of the general nephrologists and say, hey, there's a lot of options today. As we talked, you got genetic screening that can be run, and we can do all kinds of find out what your disease is. There are clinical trials underfoot. There are all kinds of new things that we can offer that we couldn't before. So it's changed, and I would share with your folks that, boy, there's such an incredible groundswell of enthusiasm and optimism now that didn't exist 5 years ago. It's a completely different conversation we have with patients than we had 5 years ago.
Fantastic. And so you're connecting through the gateway, or how are patients connecting with each other and with NephCure?
So first off, we've two-pronged approach. So we have NephCure headquarters. That's, we're less than 20 people, but we fight above our weight. We do a lot, as you know, right?
Absolutely.
So we have outreach through internet connections. If you Google, FSGS, you're kind of sent to our gateway system, which is a patient match tool. The patient goes on, logs in some information, gives you a preliminary filter of trials you might qualify for. And then it asks more questions, and we get more and more refined. So that's the one way. The other way, though, is realizing that in rare disease, it's all about grassroots. Pharma companies, I come from there, you come from there. It's not the model we grew up with, right? With big chronic diseases where contract research organizations, you mill patients. It's just the opposite. It's really intimacy and site, getting to know your site and patient responsiveness. And so we're trying at a grassroots level to roll out to all the big nephrology practices and get them to say, hey, it's a new day. These glomerular disease specialists, they're not here to steal your patients. They're here to work with you to get the best care. And so we call it the care triad, right? You've got the patient, you got the general nephrologist, and the glomerular disease specialist. And if they all work together, great things will happen. And they get connected to the trials and magic. So that's 2021 for us.
Wow, fantastic. Let's see it happen. So, just talking about clinical trials, it has been hard, I understand, for some clinical trials to be fully enrolled. It's been hard, particularly for rare diseases like FSGS, to find those suitable patients for clinical trials, get them enrolled, and generate data that will help the whole community. What do you think about the environment as it is today and where it's evolving to, and how can NephCure help?
Great, thank you. It's one where, as we talked about 3 years ago, there was no infrastructure, and pioneers like GSK who tried FSGS trials, they failed to recruit, and that was a big problem. And then you had others and they've come along and figured it out. We've all stumbled together. And I think the environment today is dramatically different. I think that contract research organizations and others have figured out that it is about intimacy, and they have to change their models. I think we've also learned that protocols and different things that are involved, that patients need to be brought into the picture, right? A lot of people design protocols with just, well, guess what? No patient's going to do that, or that patient just doesn't exist. Everybody wants that perfect patient, right? And there's no such animal. And so the reality is that where we are today, we've dramatically better at recruiting for trials than we were. But I think you and I would both agree we're still a long way from where we need to be. But at least, I think with good, honesty, I can face somebody and say, wow, there's a heck of a lot of infrastructure that didn't exist before. And now we've got organizations like Neptune and others with patients. We've learned how to find the patients, and NephCures. That's been our charge, which is, how do you find these patients before it's too late and they don't qualify? And that all means getting to earlier in the paradigm, as we talked about. It's not just the care of finding the patients earlier, because that year time between that general nephrologist they saw and now finally getting to the expert, well, that patient can be now disqualified because their function is so low. So we've really focused now, I think, moving toward the group practices and making sure that, hey guys, we're all here to work together. And that, I think this year we'll see a significant change in enrollment.
Fabulous. Do patients with FSGS or nephrotic syndrome connect via social media?
That's probably the number one way. It was astounding to me, right? I mean, anybody over the age of 40, right? With the internet, I was blown away and how much Facebook and all of these accounts. Patients with rare disease seek out other patients. It's a very lonely place to be. Any football stadium in the US, you'd only find about one nephrotic syndrome patient in the whole thing. And so there's a very active social media network in the United States, especially, and also around the world. And I would say there's maybe 4 to 5 chat groups, and they talk all the time. And so once they learn that a trial is available and different things are available to them, it gets out pretty well. And so we try to foster that. We mentor and oversee a lot of these and are active. So social media is key. Yeah.
Got it. What do you think the barriers are to engaging those community nephrologists, general nephrologists in clinical research and engaging patients to participate through those trials?
I've been making a lot of comments about general nephrologists. I just want to be clear with folks. The average nephrologist sees a new case of, let's say, FSGS maybe once a year or once every 2 years. I mean, that's just the statistics and the number. And they spend most of their day with dialysis patients and whatnot. So they're very smart people. They're angels in the world trying to help. But the reality is, how do you become an expert in something if you don't see it very often, right?
Mm.
And how do you become aware? Even if this is your specialty and you focus on clinical trials, how do you keep 20-some clinical trials all front of mind? And so I think the issue with general nephrologists is, number one, the world has changed and you may not realize it. We go to ASN meetings, right? You and I go there and you see today so much glomerular disease focus that wasn't there even just a few years ago. Yeah. And ASN's done a wonderful job of making clinical trials part of their focus. But the reality is the general nephrologists still hold the vast majority of nephrotic syndrome patients. And they're not aware, just because they don't have the time and bandwidth to be aware of all these opportunities. And so what we're trying to do is get to them and say, look, there's no embarrassment of you sharing with your patient with a glomerular disease expert. And also, be honest with you, it's probably a financially losing proposition when you treat FSGS patients by yourself. It takes a lot of time. You're on the internet researching what's latest and greatest. So what we're trying to do is broker the conversation between the general nephrologist and the glomerular disease expert, who is probably conducting clinical trials, to say, I'm not going to steal your patient. and there's no shame in talking to each other. And we're trying to broker that. And ASN is really front and center with us in lockstep, and that's happening. And I think we're going to see a big.
Fabulous. How are you? Give us some idea of how you're brokering that.
Sure. So this year we'll be rolling out at a local level glomerular disease. We call them local glomerular disease updates, where someone from NephCure, one of our local leaders, contacts the glomerular disease expert in that community and says, look, I want to form a more supportive, integrated local community here. Who are the people who are your, people you work with on a routine basis? Who are the big groups? And let's have a conference. And what we want to do is, maybe the first topic is all these updates that we've been talking about this afternoon, right? And the second is, how are we going to work together, right? I'm here to help. I'm not here to steal, okay? I have all these options. Let's work together as a community, and please take the business card of this local NephCure rep, just like a sales rep. Yeah. Put it into the patient chart that has glomerular disease, and let's let them know that we're here to help. And we'll meet on a routine basis. And we think that's a good start this year.
Wonderful. And then let's say a patient wants to, through social media, hears about NephCure, they want to participate in a clinical trial. How would NephCure facilitate it in 2021? Great.
So glad you asked that, because we got a couple ways. So if you're a patient listening to this, please go to www.kidneyhealthgateway.com. And if you can't remember that, just go to our website, nephcure.org, and you'll see a link. And it's very user-friendly. Click a button. I'm a patient, I'm a doctor, and it will step-by-step guide you through the process. There's also a whole bunch of Q&A. And people have to know that this is a golden opportunity. This is a rare disease with treatments that are already in late or mid-phase clinical trials that have been proven already through phase 1 safety, and now ready to really make a difference. And so you do not have to be forced to go onto high-dose steroids again.